Hi, in this video I'm going to nerd out a little bit on something called homocysteine. And you might be thinking to yourself, what in the world is homocysteine and why should I care about it? Well, let's start with the fact that it's February, and so we're thinking heart health and all that kind of stuff. And one of the markers that physicians look at to determine if you're at an increased risk of heart disease is something called a homocysteine level. And homocysteine is a marker that I put on when I run a comprehensive set of labs on anybody. I look at this, and let me tell you why I look at that. Why is it important to know what homocysteine is doing? First of all, it's an inflammatory substance. So we know inflammation is a root of so many things, and specifically heart-related inflammation in the case of homocysteine. It's an amino acid, and it injures the walls of the arteries. So what that means is it is irritating to the inside lining of the blood vessels, especially affecting the heart. So this is a risk factor for increased rate of heart disease and stroke. And it's a byproduct. It gets created as amino acids break down. So metabolizing protein and breaking it down, that's how we end up with homocysteine. So if we have high levels of this, we look at increased blood clotting. So does anybody want that? No, they don't. And we look at decreased blood flow. So that's the connection to strokes. Stroke is what's called an ischemic event where blood flow is reduced. So that those two things, we don't want clots and we don't want strokes or ischemia. So I think that's really, this is a really important number to look at on labs. And I look at this not just by itself, but when I'm looking at this, let me tell you some of the other things that I also look at when I'm trying to get a picture. I look at C-reactive protein, which is another inflammatory marker. A lot of times both of those are high, just painting the picture of like we have a lot of inflammation, right? Because if we have inflamed arterial walls, we probably have systemic indicators of inflammation too, which is seen in an increased C-reactive protein. I also look at somebody's liver enzymes, which are found on a metabolic panel. I love to run this test in conjunction with a nutrient test. So I'm looking at all of the nutrients and the levels of someone's fatty acids and things like that, amino acids, and I will tell you why that's important. As we go along, you'll see why I do that. So I look at those things, and then I also look at a lipid panel. So how's your cholesterol, triglycerides, things like that. So homocysteine, let's talk about, if you have high levels of this on a blood test, you're looking at the fact that it's not getting broken down. And how does it get broken down in the first place? The first thing we can do is we can remethylate it. So methylation is a process where methyl groups are added, and it helps us get rid of things that we don't want in our body. So that process is very related to your adequate levels of B9, which is folate, and B12. So if you're low on those B vitamins, you have trouble doing this. Now, to even make that more complicated, there's a genetic variant called the MTHFR variant that will make this process even more difficult for somebody. So you can have a little bit of a genetic issue with this, and you can have a big genetic issue with this. And that's another thing that I will test if I feel like it's appropriate. We'll look at that too. So we know, is this a genetic weakness a person has, and then we need to come in and we need to do something different to help them do what genetically they're struggling to do. And then the other way that homocysteine gets broken down is called transsulfuration. And what that process is that's a sulfur dependent pathway, and that requires a lot of vitamin B6, which is another B vitamin that is unfortunately really low in people. And I know this because I test a lot of people with nutrient testing day in and day out, and the B6s, the B9s, the folates, all of those B vitamins that I mentioned with methylation and transsulfuration, those are low on almost everybody I test. And so how do those get low? We eat diets high in carbohydrates, refined food, processed foods. When we eat refined and processed grains, what they do is they strip off the bran of these things, which are where all the B vitamins live. And then our body we have to rob our nutrient stores of these B vitamins just to be able to break that down and process that. So it's just really, you know, we're doing this as a society day in and day out. The other thing too is gut dysfunction, impaired digestion, which so many people have an issue with. We have insufficient stomach acid. That's really important in B12. We just have leaky gut, and so we're not absorbing nutrients the way we need to either. So those things are, when we talk about all these pathways and processes being nutrient deficient, that's a big part of it. And then, so homocysteine gets broken down into cysteine and then is a precursor to glutathione. It converts to N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione. So what happens if it stays high and doesn't break down? That's all those nutrient deficiencies that we were talking about, the B6, the B9, the folate, things like zinc and B2 and magnesium are also important here, because if you don't have those nutrients, you can't break down the homocysteine to the cysteine to the N-acetylcysteine and convert to glutathione. I run something called an organic acids test, and I see this process broken in a lot of people, because you can look at all those metabolites on an organic acids test and see that. So I know that's happening because I see it all the time. And then, so what are we looking for on a blood test? We look at homocysteine and we look for it to be under 8. Now, that the reference range on most labs is around 15. That is way too high. Ideally and functionally, 8 is the number where you want it. And if you're higher than that, you want to start investigating why is it high, and look at all these things that we're talking about, nutrient deficiencies and things like that. And if you find it to be high, what are you going to do about it? You probably need more B vitamins, and you can confirm that with a nutrient test. You probably need some more antioxidants. You need to be using N-acetylcysteine supplementally, alpha lipoic acid, vitamin C, CoQ10, those kinds of things that will help you produce that glutathione, because if your homocysteine is way elevated, you're not converting and you're probably low on glutathione too. I see that all the time. So especially in the short term, until you can get that pathway, remedied and supported a little better, you want to make sure you're getting enough to create glutathione, because it's a master antioxidant and it's really important. And then you also want to make sure that you are taking in enough healthy, good fats. There's studies that show that adequate levels of omega-3, that's the anti-inflammatory good fats, what you think of when you think, oh, I'm going to take a good fish oil supplement, that will help drive down those high homocysteine levels too. It's anti-inflammatory, and so you're offsetting that. So anyway, that is, I know that's a lot of information, but I think it's really important that we're looking at these things on labs, and we're doing this body hacking and looking at not only just what a number is, but what is it telling us about our health right now and potentially into the future. So I hope that helped, and I will talk to you soon on another video.